Great to see everyone. David, you're a sight for sore eyes. Nice to see you.
Shabbat shalom.
You too, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom, Donna.
Yeah. Well, we get. What do you think about the new coach?
I think it's got to be a step in the right direction. But I'm not. David's asking about USC football, which is something we like to talk about.
Yeah.
I'll say this, which is a kind of Torah, I suppose, at least in my house. But it's hard because I've been optimistic so many times.
I know. I don't want to jinx it, but
right. What do they say? Fool me once.
Yeah.
Shame on me. Fool me twice. Shame on you. Right. Fool me twice. Shame on me. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
Hey, Roy.
We'll cross our fingers.
Nice to see you, Gary.
How are you?
All right, Merle. Got a bunch of friends. Oh, here's Brad. I was going to say it wouldn't be a Friday, Risa. Wouldn't be a Friday without Brad. Miriam, how are you? Okay. Hey, Brad. All right. We're gonna get right to it today. So shiny. We're gonna get right to it today. Parshat Tisa, which some of us may know, has I don't know, maybe one of the most dramatic scenes in the entire Torah. Perhaps this scene, right? Moses is atop Mount Sinai receiving the Torah, 10 commandments from God, while down below our ancestors are, I suppose one could say, up to no good, being rebellious, fearful that Moses is never coming back. They revert to what they know and build the golden calf, build an idol, which, if you haven't read it yet, by the way, just went out within the last hour. Cantor Shapiro, her Shabbat message is about this, and she wrote something beautiful about maybe a little bit of sympathy for our ancestors who were so fearful, and that this was a security blanket of sorts, or a stuffed animal of sorts. Any of us with kids, for them doesn't necessarily make it right, but certainly I think makes it maybe a bit more understandable. So we're gonna look in a little more depth this afternoon at this whole dynamic of the calf, and more particularly of Moses, who comes down and in this fit of anger takes these two, allegedly stone tablets with the 10 commandments on them and throws them and shatters them. Which, whenever I read, I'll just share, reminds me, I and the majority of the rest of the clergy here are graduates of the Hebrew Union College, the Reform Movement Seminary. I studied here at the Los Angeles campus, and in the large sort of 2.5-story atrium lobby foyer of the Hebrew Union College campus here is this like 25-foot or so steel, slightly abstract statue of Moses holding these two tablets sort of above his head, and the sort of arch of his back and body and his hands and the tablets. The joke is that it sort of looks like he's about to throw them on whoever is standing in the lobby, and I walk under that every day for many years, and always think of this Torah portion. So we're going to get right into it. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And if I can convince someone, if someone will indulge me, wants to read the beginning of this, or this piece from the Torah portion from Exodus 32. I'm going to scroll through here now that I'm sharing and see if I can see anybody with a hand up. If not, that's okay. David, please.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Lord." Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink and then rose to dance.
Keep going here.
The Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord further said to Moses, "I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation." But Moses implored the Lord his God, saying, "Let not your anger, O Lord, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, 'I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring this whole land of which I spoke, to possess forever.' And the Lord renounced the punishment he had planned to bring upon his people."
Beautiful. Thank you, David. Right. So here's this dynamic, which I think is particularly interesting, right? That once again, sort of similar, I think, to the episode with Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham argues with God to spare the innocent people of these towns. Right here, you have Moses. Right, God's ready to start over again, and here you have Moses pleading on behalf of our ancestors for a second chance. Any thoughts? Anybody think anything interesting here? Anything of note? Lorraine.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. The first thing that stands up to me is, how did Aaron get away with this? How did he came out of it alive, pretty much, without any punishment, no consequence? And even to a certain degree, it almost seems like he was enabling it by asking, "Bring your gold." And then, yes, granted, he did say, "We're going to make a festival to Hashem and not to the calf," but it just seems like it was just such a thin line, or maybe not even a line at all. I don't know. I wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Oh, I don't think it's fair to say that he says we're making a festival to God. He says, "This is your God, and we're making a festival and a sacrifice to this."
All right, so you said it then.
Yeah,
so
no,
that's-
100.
yeah.
I
I'm
might
trying to cut him some
100%.
slack,
Adam. Aaron is an enabler. He's the ringleader. He does this. He organizes this, and I would put him in that same camp with the rest of our ancestors who, he too is fearful that Moses isn't coming back and what's going to happen. And he was a slave too, like everybody else. So I don't actually put him, perhaps as the leader, but I don't put him certainly, emotionally, psychologically ahead of any of the rest of the Israelites, right? It's really only Moses and Joshua, I suppose, who, have begun to develop this relationship with God. The rest of them, are at the risk of being cruel, lemmings, I think I would say. Susan, and then Brad, and then David.
Okay, I thought that was a very interesting question. I'm going to try and put my hand down.
If you've got an answer, please.
What?
If you've got an answer, please.
Yeah, because I always figured that too. And then I read on, and you know what? Two of Moses' sons, Aaron's sons, were destroyed by God.
Yes.
So you have a pretty great punishment. And often I think in the Torah, some of the recompense comes later, not immediate, like Jacob deceiving, and then he gets deceived and the like. So That just now, I thought of it when she brought that up, which was a very good question. I think this is a very rich paragraph. It has a lot in there. Besides, Moses is invoking his ancestors, which we do at every service, invoking the merit of ancestors.
Right.
He's also looking to God to say, you know, your reputation is really going to be diminished if you do this, you know.
Quite the negotiating tactic.
Negotiating tactic. Yes. And it reminds me of, and as you had said, of Sodom and Gomorrah. And God has often said, when my people win, or when I lose, my people win. And this is what's happening here, like the Avon of Aknai in the Torah. There's so many things. And then the people giving the gold that they got from Egypt, from the people of Egypt, creating this calf, a bull, which is a reminder of Egyptian and other gods sacrificing for bulls with the horns and the like. So they're taking away things that they brought with them from Egypt, and then singing and dancing and then sitting down to eat. You know, I think about that as kind of callous behavior. And then stiff-necked is another thing. We've often been called stiff-necked, and that has both positive and negative qualities. Mostly negative, that you can't look back and you're just set in your ways. But then some say, hey, wait a minute. The Jews have been stiff-necked in that they've been able to look ahead, continually look ahead and be determined in those who are following the Torah and the like. So I think this is a great paragraph.
Absolutely. And Susan, I'll just, piggyback on two things you said. One, the whole Nadav and Avihu thing, that Moses' sons who are going to get, the earth is going to swallow them up in a couple of weeks here. I actually came across a piece of Talmud that I did not include in this today, that actually makes the connection that you made, that is a punishment for this, and that God would have done that right now, but if God reacted in such a way that the people might not have accepted the Torah. And
Rabbi, you said Moses' sons. I think you meant Korach's sons.
Yes, I did mean Korach's sons. Forgive me. Thank
said
you.
Moses.
Thank you, Miriam. I apologize. And the other, right, this notion of schut avot, right, the merit of our ancestors, this idea that Moses is invoking, the patriarchs as a means to sort of remind God of this lineage, and that, this exists to a certain extent today in certain circles, that we merit a certain amount of privilege based on the merit of our ancestors. Brad, and then Risa, and then Bruce. I see a bunch of hands. I'll go to everybody for sure. Brad, go ahead.
Well, I'm reacting to the fact that in verse 7, your people is in bold. And I thought think about that, that's rather odd. Rather than saying my people, God says your people. And then whom you brought out of the land of Egypt. Of course, it's God who brought us out of the land of Egypt. And I'm wondering, and then later on, when Moses responds in verse 12, he talks to God of your people. He changes this. And I'm wondering if initially God's anger is directed at Moses in verse 7, and then subsequently in verse 9, it turns against the people. And I'm wondering if there's why God would be turning against Moses. Is there some implication that Moses didn't properly prepare the people for his absence? Obviously, there's some distancing going on here between God and Moses, and God and the people of Israel, when he refers to them as your people. So
Yes, Brad. Thank you for picking up on that. I actually shouldn't have made it bold because it draws attention to it, but absolutely. And in fact, it's as if you were reading ahead because we're going to get in just a second to this piece of Talmud that speaks to that very thing, right? But this is sort of like, when if my daughter would never do anything to frustrate either of her parents, but hypothetically speaking, if she did, and I turned to Ashley and say, well, your daughter had just did such and such, right? I mean, that's exactly what this is, right? And so I'm going to go down a little bit here, right? I'll read this, right? Your people have corrupted themselves, not my people is what's implied. Only by exclusively worshiping God did they qualify to be called God's people. Once they worship something else, God deprives them of that title. As is indicated in the prophet Hosea's formulation, you are not my people. When God said to Moses, your people, God implied the mixed multitude, the rabble whom you concerned yourself with, alluding to their disrespect and attitude toward God, right? That by worshiping this idol, they are no longer God's people. They are, presumably the golden calves people. Douglas, and then you've been so patient, Douglas, and then Bruce or Risa.
Thank you, Rabbi. Two things. I noticed that Aaron, gave in to the people and made the golden calf, but then he goes one step farther and wants to make the altar for it and the festival and the whole 9 yards. And, I can understand giving a little, but boy, he's all in. The second thing, this tells me that God is not only vengeful and angry, but he's also prideful, because Moses was trying to convince him by saying, don't let the Egyptians laugh at you as being a weak God. So God has an ego.
So it's a great point. I think that, look, if you think back to back in the story to the whole 10 plagues situation, right? You have God through Moses really trying to demonstrate God's power to Pharaoh, right? Trying to prove God's self, as it were. And so I think this exists, not in maybe a contemporary theological sense, but in a, marketplace, as it were, of gods, right? And, theoretically, this is a new monotheistic endeavor that our ancestors enterprise that our ancestors are engaging in. And so I do think there's this, look, the Egyptians have all these other gods, and all the Canaanites and pagans have all these other gods and things they're worshiping, and yet here we are coming along and saying, you are the one all powerful, source in the universe here. And if you just, kill everybody, then, that's not going to show them anything. That's not going to convince anybody of anything. So I think that's absolutely there. Risa and then Bruce, and then I see you too, David.
I see confusion here between Aaron and the people. It shifts from being Aaron's fault, Aaron's problem, to being the problem of the people. And I really question why in verse 5, he actually uses the word Adonai, and I would have expected there a name for God, but not Adonai, and that continues. And I just don't think it could have been a festival for Adonai. I don't know why the word is used.
Sorry, I'm just going back to look here. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have an answer to it, but it's a great question. Ask Stanley.
He's on.
I'm sure he will either have an answer or make one up.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I'm just looking more carefully again. Forgive me. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to push this. Oh, Bruce, go ahead.
My comment is I read Plout's commentary on this morning, and he raises the question about the cherubim versus this golden calf. and really whether there was idolatry involved in this episode or not. Apparently, you have to reconcile the presence of cherubim where the presence of God is. And if maybe this was an example of making a seat for God that Aaron was doing. Aaron was not practicing idolatry, but he was actually doing something like that was done with the cherubim. What's your take on that?
I think that's interesting. I mean, I think, look, we'll go back in the text here for a second, right? Verse 4, right? Aaron takes the gold, he makes a mold, he makes a calf, and then he says to the people, "This is your God." I mean, to me, that's pretty clear, right?
Okay.
You know, I'm not one to argue with Gunter Cloud, who was a brilliant guy, but I mean, to me, the text, and I look at the Hebrew really quick, it is pretty clear. I think, look, there certainly have been attempts to, I think, be apologetic about this, but I think it's pretty clear personally.
What is this?
You, Miriam? Oh, no. Okay. I think you're on the phone. I'm going to mute you. Okay. We're going to move on a little bit here. Okay. Right. So Moses' reaction to all this, I'll read just a little bit. Thereupon Moses turned and went down from the mountain bearing the two tablets of the pact, tablets inscribed on both their surfaces. They were inscribed on the one side and on the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing, incised upon the tablets. When Joshua heard the sound of the people in its boisterousness, he said to Moses, "There is a cry of war in the camp." But he answered, It is not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It is the sound of song that I hear. As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged, and he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. Right. So, right, I think it's a pretty easy scene to imagine. And then what I have following here are a number of different rabbinic answers as to how and why Moses actually breaks these theoretically incredibly precious, maybe the most precious thing arguably that they had at the time, tablets. Just checking. I see something in the chat here. Scroll through anybody. I saw a note there about trouble raising a hand. If you're having trouble raising the virtual hand, you can always do like a actual hand. But, we can be low tech here. All right. So here's Rambam on this same piece, right? And I don't want us to look too far ahead. Rambam says, nevertheless, Moses did not prevent himself from breaking the luchot, the tablets, for he was enraged upon seeing this evil spectacle and he couldn't bear it, right? So that it's out of his inability to control his anger, right? That he can't help himself but to break these tablets. It's the Rambam's take. Here's another that I think is particularly interesting, right? So when the people saw that Moses wasn't coming down the mountain, was delayed from coming down the mountain, they lost their faith and they sought out a foreign god to use as a conduit for God. And this is why Moses was enraged. Do you think that I am important? What holiness is there other than God? To the extent that in my absence, you make a calf. Heaven forbid, I am a person just like you, and the Torah does not rely on me. And even if I were not to have come, the Torah would not change. Right? Moses' response to them is, so what? Because I was gone, this is what happens, right? God's not leaving you. The Torah is not gone. I'm not important enough that if I disappear, that should result in idolatry. What do we think of that? What do we make of that? Penina?
I think that was a part of the process. Even breaking the tablets is to show them that it's a physical thing, and that the whole theology that he came up with, the new thing, is not going to be physical. It's not going to be something that they relate to that they can touch, or they can build, or they can melt, or they can break. And now even when he brought the 10 Commandments, it was a substantial something that they could touch, the tablets. When he broke them, it shows everybody, and melting the calf, that the part of the process was no physical present will identify the new God that you're supposed to meet. It was that's why Aaron also was spared, because after when they melted it and they drank it, it showed them that this couldn't be God. You eat it, you drink it, you break it. So I think it's just a part of the process. The fact that Aaron was a priest, the high priest, it just was a part of the process.
Well, I think it's interesting, Penina, because I think today, my little 5-year-old, she'll tell you, Daddy, God is everywhere. I mean,
exactly.
Right? God is everything. God is everything. God is everywhere. Right.
Right.
But that was not the
idea was
the logical mindset of our ancestors. Right. It's a great point.
It took time for them to figure it out. And don't forget that not everybody there was from the Hebrew tribes. Erev Rav went with him. Tons of people that were slaves, non-Hebrews, that never knew what the Hebrews were practicing with the circumcisions and whatever that was going on. And the marks on the blood on the doorpost that saved them. The Hebrews were Hebrews when they came out. We're dealing here now with people that were not Hebrews to begin with. They weren't descended of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. They had to be literally, totally stripped of everything that they ever believed in and start all over again with something that they cannot see and they cannot touch. And I think it was a part of the process, even the breaking of the tablets.
Well, I think it also raises an interesting point. Well, I'm surprised also that no one asked what I think is a very interesting question, which is, where did they get all this gold?
The Egyptian gave them stuff when they left just to leave. And it says so. It says so in the story that they gave them everything, a lot of stuff. Just get out of there. They were scared.
Right, so we're not going to really go into today, but there's this whole the text suggests that on the way out the door, the Egyptians wanted to just get rid of them so much that they gave them earrings, these earrings and such.
Yes,
right.
Yes,
but the rabbis have a whole debate about this as to whether or not it was given or whether or not it was
of the Torah. It's not
taken. Whether or not there's many opinions that it was taken.
Well, the Midrashim can give it's a rabbi sits there and he can give you his interpretation, just like I am giving you my interpretation.
100%.
You can either make sense of it, accept it, or say it's a story.
It's an interesting question, certainly either way.
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Merle and then Brad.
So I'm thinking about what Stanley said this morning in his 0-hour Torah study commentary that he does sometime Thursday night for Friday morning, that you got these 2 sets of tablets, the first one that he threw on the ground and everything, and the first set was what God told Moses to write on those tablets. The second set was what God used his hand to write on those tablets. And I think that the enragement from the people and they're running to build the calf, in my head sits with the fact that they got mad. They're mad that Moses is doing everything and telling them what he's being told to do. And the second set, at that point, maybe they're more satisfied that somewhere in this they were included in one way or another that we don't know because it's the way it's written. And then all morning long since I listened to that, I've been thinking, and I know I'm jumping way ahead, but could this also be the reason that in Deuteronomy, there's different wording for some of the 10 Commandments?
Ooh.
That's where my head has been since I heard this at 8 o'clock this morning.
That's so interesting that because I've spoken many times about the discrepancies between the version of the 10 Commandments that we find here in Exodus and the one we find in Deuteronomy. And I've spoken many times, which we'll get to a little bit later, depending on time, about these two sets and why we end up with two. Ironically, I've never made the connection that maybe one articulation from Exodus, one from Deuteronomy reflect, a difference potentially in these two sets. I'm gonna do a little digging on that because I've never heard about that. I never heard about that connection. Certainly never made it myself, but I think it's interesting.
It just came after he had this discussion, and I listened to it and I thought about it. This is kind of what came into my head, and it's been droning on me all morning long. So if you find an answer, I'll be happy.
I will look. Brad and then Susan, and then back to Penina.
Yeah, I'm looking at the conduit for God language there, because the implication here is that the Hebrews are not worshiping an idol, but that this golden calf is simply a vehicle through which they reach God, which is not exactly the same as idolatry, as I understand idolatry.
I would agree. Yet, certainly in contemporary Jewish practice, right, there's a aversion to using anything as a conduit for God, right? I mean, I fall into that all the time, right, where people think clergy are a conduit for God, which they are in other religious traditions, not in ours, thankfully, right? But I also think here of, I think context matters, right? Because if a Martian landed tomorrow and strolled into a synagogue tomorrow morning and looked at a hakafah, looked at a Torah scroll being carried around the room, and depending on the congregation, if you're in a Persian congregation, you might see people literally bowing down to the Torah, right? You'll certainly see, right, the touch and kiss. Was it kiss and touch? Nobody ever knows. It's touch and kiss, by the way, right? It certainly looks like idolatry. We don't think about that, but it looks like idolatry. It looks like we are worshiping this scroll, this physical scroll, that it must be, holy. It must be very, very precious and important. And while it is, it's just a thing, right? It's the text itself that has meaning and it is holy, right? So I think that the context with which an object is used in sort of a religious
absolutely.
Can I? I've had my hand up a long time.
Yes, I'm sorry, Miriam. Go ahead. I didn't see you down there. I'm sorry. I've been following you. Miriam, please.
I am thinking a little differently this year than I have thought in all my many previous years about this. I'm a little softer on the people. I should not be. They were wrong. But then the building of the Mishkan has a little influence on me. 2 chapters before this, I think, in Truma, they go into huge detail about building a very specific edifice. And the rabbis say, not that God needs it. Of course, he doesn't need anything, but the people need it for their God, which, of course, has lasted to this day. And Al Tifrosh min hatzibur, do not separate yourself from the community. And unless we have a place to congregate, physically see each other, except for Zoom, then we surely need that to exist, to literally exist. This year, I feel because the main problem was lack of patience. If a teacher does not have patience, they should not literally teach. If every parent can use whatever patience they have, they can use 100% more patience than they own. Patience is a tremendous thing to strive for, but it's not high up on our list for some reason. Other things are being good to others, giving to others. That's hugely important. You can't exist as a human being or as a Jew without giving to others. But patience is such an enormous quality to aspire for. And I don't mean to sound like I'm preaching, but in every relationship between two young people together, two girlfriends, two boyfriends, man and woman, parents with their children, especially in these political times today, patience is so sorely needed. I mean, I've had friends that have said something and have not wanted to talk to them for the rest of my life. How's that for lack of patience?
No, Miriam, please don't apologize for preaching. That's a wonderful thought, and I'm going to steal that for a sermon. I guarantee you.
Okay.
No,
well, I'm a little more with the people than I have been in the past. They had lack of patience. If they only waited, they wouldn't have had a golden calf. But they needed that concrete thing. They were wrong. We know it. But they came from it. They came from a country of statues, of praying not only to the living, but praying to the dead. They came from a country where they made statues of the dead themselves. And so it would take more than this short time for them to come to what we have in our lives. And that is, we can believe, we have faith, and we do not need to see something concrete.
Look, unless we forget, fear is a huge motivator, not necessarily in a positive direction, right? But fear causes us to do all kinds of things, good and bad. And they were absolutely fearful. Panina and then Susan.
Okay, what is the national anthem of Israel? Od lo avdat tikvatenu. We never lost our hope to have a country of our own. It's the same thing. We had a journey through hundreds of years as exiled people, and then we came back to Israel, and we're still singing, we never lost our hope. And what does every country has on their flag? Isn't it symbols? Every country have their own symbol. How can you tell that the state of Israel, you got that blue Magen David and the white flag? So what is this? Isn't that a symbol? Something material that you could touch? We have symbols for every army, that the buttons that they wear on their shirts. I look at that at the same thing. It was a process. And we had it twice. Once when Moses brought us there, and then we were taken away. And now till in 1948, we got a state. So, and I also going to tell you that in Europe, in the program that this guy from Jerusalem is telling us about Hungary and Czechoslovakia, he mentioned the golem. Why do they have so many golems in this temple? Why do they have to look at those and it's still sitting there? And people can touch them and buy them. Because it has a story behind it. And the story was telling you about the presence of God through this particular thing. So people still have it there. And so forth and so forth. So I'm just like, it's something that we never really gave up in a way. That's it. Because we need to relate to something, to some kind of tangible that will represent us and every other nation in the world. That's it.
It's also right a rallying thing, right?
Yes.
An object, right?
Yes.
Certainly flags, right?
Yeah.
It's something for the community to embrace.
Yeah, and in the temples, you got the silver bells, the rimonim, the pomegranates, the silver ones hanging there. We talked about it. We need it. People need it. They can color it and call it whatever you want, but you need to have something physical that will represent you. that you can relate to, that will tell you a story, that will remind you. That's it.
It's interesting. As you're saying that, Panina, I'm thinking about everybody who spent the last 2 weeks running around town wearing Rams gear.
Yeah.
Right? In a way, is a, collegiate logo or a sports team's logo that people have great affinity. In some cases, it is a religious experience, as it were.
Yeah, and the Torah is a lot of stories that we're trying to teach you something that you should understand yourself.
Absolutely. Susan.
Okay, so I kind of forgot some of the things I was going to say.
I doubt that.
One was the breaking of the Torah was breaking a contract, and most of the time contracts were written on stone in those days. I mean, they didn't have, they had papyrus later, but okay. The bull I've read was meant to be a pedestal and a conduit towards God, as I think Bruce or Brad mentioned. And Deuteronomy was written later with different people there and having past experience to write it. I mean, that's the general theory now, that Deuteronomy, as when Merle mentioned some of the discrepancies in the Ten Commandments, there are also other discrepancies, but Deuteronomy, from what we believe now, was written in hindsight for some of the problems that came up. And I liked Panina's mentioning, was it Erev Rav is the multitude? Was that the group for the Egyptians that? Yeah. Okay, so they have been blamed for a lot. So I just want to make sure of that name. Also, the people then were punished. Didn't Moses order that the gold be melted down, and then the people have to swallow it, which killed them. So there was retribution. Then another thing is that I've always, first of all, 40 days is a long time, and we know how lack of patience a lot of people have for the pandemic too. Now, true, it's 2 years, but 40 days was also a long time for them sitting there in the desert and wondering what's going to happen. First and second writing of the Torah, I have a question to ask you about that. The first one, from what I read last night, was inscribed by the hand of God. And the second one, God dictated to Moses. That's the one that survived. Now, there must be some metaphor in there or something. Is it that God's commandments need human action, acceptance and action, or what would you say is? I
would say you need to come at 6:30 tonight to listen to my drash tonight.
Oh.
I'll spoil it for anybody who's watching. Okay. Watch again tonight on Facebook. No, I would say, and some people have probably heard me say this because I've many times. To me, the lesson there is what God creates alone for human beings doesn't work, doesn't survive. It's what human beings create in partnership with God that has meaning and is what survives.
Okay, so great. That's what I was trying to figure out from that. Then one other thing, the description of the tablets being written on both sides, and I think some of that's ambiguous, and I would like to know, certainly in Christian art, Catholic art to begin with, there are two tablets and it's on the right and left. But does it also mean front and back?
That's a great question. I was thinking that too as we went through that. By the way, the right and left is not necessarily a Christian thing. Look above the ark in the sanctuary.
Oh yes, of course.
Or by the way, the historic temple ark, which is in the Irmis Chapel, it's the same thing. It's funny. I think when I think of the front and the back, I think of Kandinsky, who often painted on both sides of a canvas. Different.
Well, and a lot of artists did.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Canvas was weird, and
there is a reason for it, because it's divided into the yes to do and the ones that you're not supposed to do.
Right.
Half of the first half is what you should do. I mean, what you shouldn't do.
Right.
Well, the first
Or the
half.
other way around.
Right.
Okay, they know.
Right. The thou shall versus the thou shalt not.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
But that's good. So you're saying it could mean as side by side and not necessarily on the back?
No, they were side by side. I think so. The way all the pictures and everything shows you is that you have honor your father and your mother. I'm the one God. All the yeses on one side, 5,
Right.
and then the other 5 are the no. Don't kill. Don't cheat on your wife. Lot in af. Don't
murder.
murder. Don't steal. Don't all this stuff.
So you don't know what it was written in the back as well?
I don't. I don't know if it was right. If
I
it's,
never saw the back. I saw
it's,
side by side.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to push us forward a little bit here. So this is a midrash on this parsha. So what did Moses do? He took the luchot, he took the tablets from the hand of God in order to calm his anger. Right, so Moses is up on the mountain. God says, hey, something bad's going on down there. He gets angry and he takes the tablets. To what is this compared? To a king who sent someone to betroth a woman through a middleman. She went and acted inappropriately with another man, the middleman who was innocent. What did he do? He took the ketubah, which the king gave him to betroth her, and tore it. His intention being that it is better she is judged as an unmarried woman than a woman who is married.
Oh,
right on.
Right? What Moses did was the same. When the Jewish people sinned, he took the luchot, he took the tablets, and he broke them. So as to say, if they would have seen their punishment, they would have not sinned. Right? And the other piece, which I think I hear in this, even though it's not said, right, is this idea that, you know, the covenantal relationship is a marriage between God and the Jewish people, right? And you could go so far as to say that the tablets are the ketubah, as it were. And so in a direct comparison to this this metaphor, Moses is breaking that. Penina, I saw you nodding.
May I say something, Rabbi?
Who is that? Donna? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I really appreciate everyone's remarks. We're talking about the gold and touching the gold, and gold has to be purified. And what Merle said, the dross of the gold comes up to the top and is removed so the gold is pure. But we're not to worship the gold. Everything is instrumental in us coming into the tabernacle, to the sanctuary, to worship God and have a relationship with him. And people make mistakes. People are weak, but people are also naive and brave and courageous. I feel like I'm living the impossible dream. To love pure and chaste from afar, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause to keep Israel and everybody safe. I'm going to do it all my life. Nobody's perfect. But I appreciate the comments. And I like the fact that God redeems and brings people closer. We study the Torah. But God knows our hearts more than anyone else. And that's all I can say.
Amen.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Donna.
You're welcome.
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to go a little further. I'm just make sure maybe scroll through. See, okay, I'm going to go a little bit further here. We have a few minutes left. Okay, 2 more that are related. I'm going to do them together, which I think are also beautiful sort of midrashim about this. So Moses took the luchot, he took the tablets, he went down the mountain, and the letters were carrying themselves and Moses. And when the letters saw the instruments and the golden calf, they flew off the tablets and became heavy. Moses could no longer carry them, so he threw them out of his hands. And it says, as it says, and he broke them under the mountain. And then the other piece kind of relating to the same notion, that Moses looked at the people, looked at the tablets and saw that the words had flown off of them and said, how can I give the people these tablets that are blank, in essence, have nothing? So instead, I will break them. Right. We'll do a few more and then take any final notes and comments. Okay. So Then when we've sort of already started to talk about this, then we get to the second set of tablets, right? I'm just because of time, I'm going to read so we can get through this. Right? God says to Moses, carve out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered. Be ready by morning, and in the morning come up to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on top of the mountain. No one else shall come up with you, and no one else shall be seen anywhere on the mountain. Neither shall the flocks and the herds graze at the foot of the mountain. So Moses carved out 2 stone tablets like the first, and early in the morning he went up on Mount Sinai as God had commanded him, taking the 2 stone tablets with him. So here, right, God references this idea that Moses breaks these tablets. Talmud says, in speaking about this idea which you broke, the tablets that Moses broke, that those broken tablets are put in the ark right next to what eventually will be the new whole tablets. And Rabbi Joseph says that this teaches us that both the whole tablets and the fragments of the broken tablets were both in the ark. And hence, they compare this to a scholar who has forgotten his learning through no fault must also be treated with respect, right? That even though they're broken, they still have value, not just to be, tossed in some version of an ancient desert dumpster, right? Not to be thought of again. And that those broken pieces were carried with our ancestors in the ark, right next to the most valuable thing they possessed, ultimately, placed in the temple in the holiest place they could put it. And we're probably not going to get to it, but the last text here today talks about, a sermon that I've given half a dozen times, I think, right? Which is that this is a way to say that we all carry brokenness with us, right? We all carry brokenness inside of us. And that's not something to be discarded. That's something to be carried with us, because that brokenness, just like it did for our ancestors, is a part of the story and a part of our story. And pretending that it doesn't exist, pretending it's not there is not productive, certainly, and doesn't really work. I want to touch on, and David, I'll get to you in a second. I want to touch on something else Penina said, this idea that all of this was sort of part of the evolution. You didn't go so far as to say this, but perhaps what was supposed to happen. And this next piece of Talmud, I think, speaks to that, right? Speaks to this idea that God is actually happy that Moses broke these tablets. That was what God wanted Moses to do. So we've learned here that 3 things Moses did of his own accord that God agreed with. He broke the tablets. And what was his reasoning? He breaks Moses' reasoning for breaking the tablets. I think this is fascinating. Right? Moses says that the Pesach offering, the Passover offering, which is only one of the 613 commandments in the Torah says that any strange person, anyone who worships an idol, is not allowed to eat from the Passover offering. The Luchot, the tablets, contain the entire Torah, all 613 commandments. And in this case, the Jewish people are idol worshipers. So how much more so that should not be given to them if you're not even allowed to have a bite of lamb, right? And then the rabbis ask, how do we know that God agreed with this? This is, I think, a little bit of a bridge too far, but they say it is written, right? The tablets which you have broken. And Reish Lakish says that the word asher, which means which you've broken, can be juxtaposed to mean yasher koach, or koch, right? Congratulations for having broken the tablets. That may be a little bit of a semantic, linguistic, pretzel to twist oneself into, but I think it's interesting. I saw a hand. Miriam, go ahead, please. I think you're muted.
Rabbi, you just said something very quickly, which I took to my heart, and which is a chidush that I learned from you in every shiur. First of all, I want to thank you for your wonderful shiurim. I think they're outstanding.
Thank you. You're welcome.
This is what you said, just passing. You said, well, we all have something broken within us. Now, this should make us a little more sympathetic to broken other people. We are maybe as broken as they are, in a totally different direction, which perhaps is what we rationalize, which is all the difference. But nevertheless, before, again, I sound like I'm preaching, and believe me, I don't mean to. It's just my 95-year-old persona gives me extra permission. And when you all get to be 95, maybe you'll feel that way in 30, 40 years. At any rate, Rabbi, this should make everyone a little more humble. Besides being grateful every day of our lives, before we just berate and lay it out and get angry and even get furious and even lose control of our anger, which is a hideous thing to do, before we do that, let's realize how broken we are. I believe this absolutely in my heart.
Why?
It makes me think of, two things. It makes me think of the Hemingway quote that the world breaks everyone and that some of us are stronger in the broken places. And also the Leonard Cohen piece, right? That there's a crack in everything that's broken. That's where the light gets in, right?
I have one sentence that I have to tell you, maybe.
And then Brad.
Laugh a little bit. He's telling them, first you make it, you build it, now you want to eat it? Because they wanted to eat at the Seder, the same thing that he built a thing to. So that's what you thought God is. Yeah. Now you want to eat it.
It's amazing. Brad, go ahead.
So Rabbi, that image of the letters flying off the tablets, that's really a powerful one, but I'm not grasping it. How do you interpret that?
I think it's sort of personally, I have no basis for what I'm about to say, but I think it's sort of a Kabbalistic notion. There's a story that is in, I forget which anthology of sort of folktales that I haven't in a few years, but I used to tell to the nursery school kids on Shabbat right around Simchat Torah. And the story is in essence about this community that couldn't afford a Torah scroll. And so they had, in essence, a faux Torah scroll that had nothing written on it, but they had one man in the community who was blind and who once upon a time had memorized the entire Torah and was able to still teach and read to them, even though despite the fact that this Torah scroll was blank. And without every detail of the story, the essence of the story is that this community's kavanah, their spirit and their intention was so strong and so wonderful that on one Shabbat, the doors of the synagogue flew open and letters streamed in through the synagogue and turned the Torah scroll into a real kosher Torah scroll, right? So there's all this kind of imagery of Hebrew letters sort of having lives of their own. There's also the other thing that I think of is this imagination that this is a story that's often told when children begin at an upshurn, when children officially begin their learning at 3 and get a haircut. We do it when the kids are younger for begin nursery school or kindergarten. But the story is this story of sort of why does the alphabet begin with Aleph? And the story is that it was going to begin with Bet, but Bet in essence gets into an argument with God and has an ego and wants to be first, and so God ends up making Bet be second. Right? So this idea of kind of anthropomorphizing letters, I think, is not uncommon, right? But I'm just going to go back to the text for 1 second. We're out of time, but I'm going to look really quick here. Sorry.
Could you repeat what you just said? That the argument with God, 8 wants to go first, but God says what? I didn't get that.
That wants to go first out of sort of ego, and God says basically, no, you can be second because ego has no place in this. is sort of the idea. So I'm going to leave us there. And I think that as Miriam sort of highlighted again, I think this notion of, this image, I should say, of both the idea that Susan brought up, right? That it's the second set of tablets, the ones that human beings and God create together. Those are the ones that last. But at the same time, the first set of tablets, those broken tablets, still have a place.
Yes.
Right. And they both tell our story as a people, right? Both the whole and the broken tell our story. And that, you can't have one without the other. If we only had the brokenness, all we would have is this story of rebellion and idolatry and all these horrible things. And if we only had the whole tablets, all we would think about is that somehow the world demanded perfection from us. But having both, I think, sort of, is that dichotomy that we have so often, right? In Asian cultures, it's the yin and the yang. Many of us have heard that midrash that, we're meant to carry two slips of paper in our pockets, one that tells us the world was created for us, one that tells us that we're but dust and ashes. We're meant to live somewhere in the middle. I think this is similar. We're meant to be somewhere in the middle between the brokenness and, the wholeness, realizing that both are a part of us and both tell our story. So on that note, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Happy President's Day.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. Very
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Well done. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Good job.
Thank you.